So you've made your gauge swatch, but it doesn't match that's written in the pattern. In fact, you'd like to substitute for a different weight yarn than what's recommended. Well, today I'm going to be sharing with you how you can substitute a different weight yarn, going from an Aran, maybe down to a DK, or a worsted down to a size 3. And we're going to work out how we can do that successfully and still complete our projects with the correct finish size. In case we haven't met, my name is Fiona and I am the designer behind Cozy Rosy Crochet and of course the cable and crossed cardigan. Now this cardigan is about to be released as a crochet along, and a number of people have said they want to shop their stash to make their cardigans, which means they may have to substitute the yarn that I've used for a different weight yarn. So let me start by saying a huge well done for actually making your gauge swatch, because this is going to help you work out if you can substitute the yarn for a different weight and how you can do it, as well as kind of taking a short route for switching up and changing your tension. When you're substituting yarn, it can feel quite a challenge, because if you're taking on a big project and you're making a big change, like changing the yarn weight, you still want to ensure that your finished project ends up at the right finish size so that you can wear it proudly. One of my other videos on yarn substitution really covers the absolute basics, where it is easier to swap out a yarn that's recommended by opting for one that is the same yarn weight or of course the same yarn fibre. Both of those have an impact on the overall finished look of your project, but sometimes you don't want to make the additional expense of choosing the same yarn that a crochet designer has used to make their pattern. It could well be that the yarn that they've chosen has now been discontinued. That sadly does happen more frequently than we'd like. It might be that that yarn is just simply not available where you live, or perhaps the shade you want or prefer to work in is not available in the yarn range that's been recommended by the designer. You could of course have a sizable yarn stash that you'd like to raid from and use up rather than investing in more yarn. If you wanted to create a lighter weight version of a garment, perhaps you live in a warm weather country as opposed to me, who is currently sat on another rainy day in the UK, and you want to opt for a lighter weight yarn with a different fibre, and you want to know for certain that that project is going to work out right. So whatever reason you're choosing to substitute your yarn weight, this video is going to take you through step by step how to calculate, yes, there's maths involved, how to calculate that finished size so that you can complete your project with confidence. There is a big assumption with this video that you have already completed a gauge swatch for the pattern that you want to follow. For this video, I'm going to be using my cable and crossed swatch and pattern to talk you through how you would adjust the pattern or what you would be looking for so that you can substitute for a different yarn weight. I do have to point out that I'm in the UK and we use every single measurement going. Because I'm talking about garments, I'm going to be using mainly inches, because I cannot wrap my head around having a centimetre measurement around my body because the number is simply too large. So we're going to be talking inches throughout this video. As a little reminder, when you're measuring gauge, you should be measuring within a gauge swatch. You should not make a swatch that is exactly 4 inches or 10 centimetres long or wide. That's not enough. You don't want to be counting these edge rows. You want to be measuring within the swatch that you've made. So for this example, this is the cable and crossed cardigan swatch. This pattern actually comes with a pattern for the gauge, so you can then follow that pattern knowing that you'll have enough to measure within. Not all patterns provide that, and as an example, here is how the gauge is written in the cable and crossed cardigan pattern. You can see that it has 16 stitches and 10 rows, and that should equal 4 inches in pattern using a 5.5mm hook. It very usefully tells us to simply use a larger or smaller hook to achieve gauge. What that sentence about the gauge means is that the designer, in my case me, achieved their gauge within that 4-inch square, and that's the number of stitches and the number of rows that you should also have to meet gauge. It could be that you'll see examples that say 15 stitches and 10 rows equals half double crochet or HDC with a 4mm hook. That just means you need to make a swatch that is at least 5 inches wide, 5 inches tall, and within those 5 inches you'll measure your gauge using the half double crochet stitch. This pattern uses a row repeat, so it uses the in pattern because you would measure within the pattern of that gauge. So what is out? What is out on your gauge swatch? Is it that you have too many rows? Is it you have too many or too few stitches? It's important to know what's wrong so that you know exactly which bit it is you're looking to correct. The topic of achieving gauge is something I see commonly discussed in Facebook groups, and most recently I saw someone asking a question about, well, they were stating that their gauge is out by 2 stitches. Will it make an impact? Will it affect the finished size of the pattern? And believe it or not, 1 to 2 stitches won't make a huge difference if you're making a small project. But if you add extra stitches on based on every inch in your cardigan, it's soon going to add up. If you have just 1 to 2 stitches extra in your 4-inch gauge, it doesn't seem like much. But if you imagine you're making a 34-inch cardigan, those extra 1 to 2 stitches really start to add up when you consider them over a larger amount of inches. Regardless of whether it's your rows or your stitches that are out, step 1 that I'm going to share with you now is possibly the easiest way to hopefully correct your gauge simply. The simplest way to adjust your tension or your gauge is to rework your gauge swatch using a different hook size. Using a different hook size to either increase or decrease the amount of stitches or rows you've achieved. If you find that you have too many stitches within that 4-inch measurement, you need to increase your hook size so that you work less stitches in that space. If you have too few stitches, you're going to want to decrease your hook size so that you end up with more stitches inside that 4-inch window. I will make a little note here to say that it's important that you don't increase or decrease your hook size too much, because it will really impact on the overall finished look and feel of the fabric compared to what the designer wanted or was looking to achieve with your project. So I would only recommend going up 1/2 or 1 millimeter, maybe 2 at an absolute push, going up or down either way, because if you end up going wildly bigger than what's recommended, you're going to end up with a looser, more drapey fabric, and it could be hanging off on all the wrong places. Or if you go too tight and use too small a crochet hook, your fabric is going to become stiffer and it won't have as much movement and actually will lack the drape that the project is supposed to have a nice comfy fit. There is one extra easy tip that you could try if you have a lot of yarn on your hands, and that is simply, if you're working with a smaller weight yarn, you can simply double up the strands to work out a different yarn weight. You can try 2 strands of size 3 or double knit to achieve an Aran weight yarn, or you can even try 2 worsted or Aran weight yarns to make a chunky weight yarn. You can really create some beautiful colours by working different colours in those 2 strands that you work together. So if you click in the top right hand corner, you can find out more about double stranding your yarn and whether or not that will be a suitable alternative for you. So we're going into step 2, which is maths. Maths is not my favourite subject. I was never very good at school, so I'm going to talk you through the way that I understand how you can do these calculations, and I hope they make sense to you as well. You do need quite a bit of information about the pattern that you are making to ensure that you can calculate certain things correctly. Before you start your maths, you need to make sure that you have looked at the finished sizes that are available to make in that project. You also need to work out if it's a garment, if you're going up a size for a better drape or going down a size for a closer fit. You need to be certain which size you are making before you even start these maths, because that's going to be the finished size you want to achieve with your project. So once you know which size you are making, this can really help you determine which size you need to follow in the pattern if you're substituting the yarn weight. Now, once again, I'm going to be using the cable and cross cardigan in this example because I have all the maths and it's easier for me to explain. Alongside my correctly gauged swatch, I have made some extras in different yarn weights and in different hook sizes as well, and the difference is quite phenomenal. The original gauge, as I've already mentioned, is 16 stitches within that 4-inch window, and that's on this swatch here. Let's see how my swatch turns out if I use a 5.5mm hook and a chunky weight yarn. So you can see that there is quite a considerable difference in the finished size of that gauge swatch. Without even measuring the gauge, you can see that quite rightly, it is way too big. Now, most people are unlikely to be substituting with a heavier weight yarn because lots of people prefer to make their cardigans with a size 3, so they're nice and lightweight and become a light layer. Let's have a look at the original swatch against some size 3 DK weight yarn worked with a 5.5mm hook. So you can see that most definitely we have achieved the right number of rows without even measuring, but you can also see there are a few stitches short. Now it's not many because this is of course only a 5-inch swatch, but actually again, thinking about that overall finished size of the pattern that we're making, those few stitches really do add up. So let's talk some maths on this one. Now I have notes because obviously I don't want to give you any wrong information. So if I look down, I apologise. I'm going to use a rather extreme example now for you so that you can calculate how you would rework it if you didn't want to go up a hook size, you just wanted to use the recommended hook size for the yarn. So I've also made a swatch using DK weight or a size 3 yarn and a 4mm hook. Now you can see just by looking that there is way too few stitches, way too few rows, and it feels like it's just not going to be a good substitution. Now, if this is the case, I don't want you to worry. You can still use this weight yarn and a 4mm hook if you want to, but you are going to have to do some maths. So let's break this maths down, and we're going to start by looking at the stitch count and how we can correct that a really easy way. Begin by taking your stitch count that you have on your completed swatch and divide that number by 4. It doesn't matter if that number is a decimal pointed number, just note that number down because that's the number of stitches you have per inch. So in my swatch, I have 4.5 stitches per inch. We need to then work out what the finished size is of the back panel that we are making. So in my case, I'm doing the extra large in the cable and cross cardigan that you can see here, and you can see that I need to work 24 inches to finish my back size in an extra large. I have got up one size for a bit of a looser fit. As you can see, I like it a little bit baggy on my body. So you simply multiply the number of stitches you have per inch by the number of inches you need, and that will give you the number of stitches you need to make. So in my case, 4.5 times 24 equals 108 stitches. How easy was that? It's not quite that easy, but it gives us a number that we can work with. When we look at the pattern and we can see at this back panel instruction, it gives us the stitch count at the end of row 1. It shows that with the 2XL, I only need an extra couple of stitches to follow that pattern size. And that's exactly what I would do. I'd grab my DK, I'd grab my size 4mm hook, and I would just follow the 2XL instructions for the whole pattern, for the front panels, the sleeves, everything. That would give me that finished size that is really close to what I want to achieve using that yarn weight and that hook. I truly believe this is magic and not maths when it does work out that simply. I'm so confident that it works that my very own tester had to do this. With this pattern test for the V-neck option, I provided the yarn to 2 of my testers and they had no choice but to try and meet gauge because it was the exact same yarn. So in theory, they should just pick up their 5.5mm hook, which is the recommended hook size for the pattern, and crack on. But one of my testers and I have very differing gauge and tension, so we had to literally use this maths to calculate which size she would need to follow. She normally takes a small, wanted to go up to a medium for a nice loose fit, but her gauge meant that she would have had to have gone down to like a 4mm hook with this Aran weight, worsted weight yarn, and the drape was just too stiff. It wouldn't have been comfortable to wear. So she simply used a 5mm hook for her gauge swatch and calculated with this maths, she simply needed to follow the extra small pattern. And as you can see in this picture here, it fits her like an absolute dream. I must admit, I was quite secretly pleased that we had to be able to do that because it meant that I could really kind of reinforce this message that it is okay to follow a different size, knowing you're going to achieve the correct finished size. Just a quick note to say that if you are at either end of the size gradings that are available in a pattern, for instance, my patterns are graded from extra small up to 5XL, this might not always work out for you because there is not a size to go down to or up to. So if you really get stuck with any of my patterns and you want to grade it for a different size, do let me know. If you're an extra small and you need to go down, or a 5X and you need to size up, just drop me a message and I will help you as much as I can to calculate the size you need to make one of my patterns. So we've pretty much sorted the stitches. You now know that you can work out how to work with a different weight yarn with a little bit of maths. But what if your rows aren't correct? You've no doubt seen people showing you videos of how you can adjust how you yarn over, how you create a different or a taller stitch based on how you yarn over and pull through your stitches. And yes, in theory, for a smaller project, that would probably work out. But if you're making a project over a number of weeks, you are not going to remember to adjust your stitch height for every single stitch you make. And I personally feel it's a little bit of a risk kind of going down that route. If sizing up or down your hook hasn't made the difference that you need it to, then we're back to maths again, I'm afraid. But it is possible. So this is a bit more complicated, especially as I'm using my example of the cable and cross cardigan and the V-neck option. If you're following the cable and cross cardigan and you're making the square neck, you are good to go to a certain extent. I'll explain how you calculate your neckline depth in a moment. It's probably easier than the V-neck option, but it's still doable. Okay. There are a couple of extra things to look at if you are changing the length of a pattern, either based on your gauge or from your own preference. It's really important to know how your pattern is constructed. So for instance, with the cable and cross cardigan, they are worked bottom up on every single panel. There are also other ways that garments are worked. They could be worked side to side. They could be worked from top down. For a bottom up garment, it is really important to know where shaping happens. And what I mean by that is you might have some waist shaping where stitches go in or are decreased to give you a shape at the waist. It could be that stitches are increased for the bust or decreased for the shoulder shaping. There's lots of different ways that patterns are adjusted to give you a nice fit. The cable and cross cardigan has minimal shaping other than at the underarms or at the sleeves. So you can add length anywhere to this pattern before you reach your shoulder shaping. It's important to note that not all patterns will be very obvious as to where the shaping is being made. The schematic or the diagram of the pattern pieces where they're going to be joined will be a good indicator of where you can see shapes changing, decreased stitches, different measurements. They'll really help you kind of understand where the pattern is changing, where the shaping is happening. If you are working from bottom up and there is waist shaping, any additional length would need to be added below that waist shaping. Because after that point, it's already calculated based on the average body length from your waist to your bust to your shoulder height. That's all calculated into the pattern with those increases and decreases. So the chances are the easiest place is to place it at the bottom part of your top or your garment. With patterns that are worked onto a yoke, there's usually a lot more instructions given with regards to shaping, where you can increase, where you can decrease. If there is no instructions given for that, you might have to just wing it. But if you have quite a easy to follow pattern and you want to adjust that length, perhaps you want to make it longer than the designer has, and you want to make sure that it's still going to look good, I'm going to help you work through with some maths how you can make that happen. I'm going to be using the cable and cross cardigan again as an example because there are 3 different length options already included in this pattern, from the hip length, the tunic length and the thigh length. We can use your gauge swatch and the number of rows you've calculated in the same way we did for our stitches to work out how many rows we need to make in total by knowing that finished size or the finished length we want to achieve. Once again, using my extreme gauge swatch of a size 3 yarn and a 4mm hook, you can see that I only have 13 inches in my 4-inch measurement. So we take that 4-inch measurement and how many rows we have, we divide those number of rows by 4 once again to give us our number of rows per inch. So I'm going to be dividing 13 by 4 to get 3.25 rows. So every inch is going to be 3.25 rows. Now I know that I would like to make a tunic length. So for that, I need to multiply my 3.25 rows per inch by the length I want to achieve, which is 30 inches. This gives me a total row count that I need to reach 30 inches from the shoulder to my tunic length. I need to do 97.5 rows. I'm no maths expert, but I certainly know that I can't do half a row in crochet. So we're just going to immediately round that up to 98. Let's have a look at the schematic of the back panel, and you can see on the back panel, you can see that there is a top section, and that's where we shape for the shoulders. And you can see that for extra large, it's given me a measurement of 9 inches. If I times 9 inches by that inch measurement that I have, which was 3.25, it tells me that I need to work 29.75 rows, 30 rows for the top section of my pattern. That leaves 21 inches for the bottom half of my pattern that I need to make. That gives me a calculation of 68.25. Round that down because we want an even number. So we're going to go for 68 rows. So now we have a total row count for the bottom part of the back panel and the top part of the back panel. Now what I know, because I designed the pattern, is that there is a 4-row repeat in the cable and crossed pattern. So this is something you're going to have to consider when you're changing those yarn weights, is there a pattern repeat, and does my row count need to account for that as well? So the pattern repeat for the cable and cross cardigan is 4 rows. So I need to calculate if the row amounts I've given myself are divisible by 4. So 68 is divisible by 4, so that gets a big tick, but 30 is not. So I would just simply round up to, I would not round down because that would reduce the length. I'm going to round up by an extra 2 rows, which is going to give me a total row count for the top part of 32, which gives me an overall row count of 100. Yes, of 100, which is incredibly close to that first measurement that we did, which was 97.5 rows for those 30 inches. So that's it, we've sorted the back panel. So that maths wasn't too bad, was it? We can almost see exactly what we need to be doing. That back panel is sorted. I'm going to be working 68 rows in the lower part of the pattern and an extra 32 rows for the top part of my back panel. But of course, I need to adjust my front panels or the other elements of the pattern to go alongside that increased length. Now, we can do this maths. We know what we're doing. It's very simple. We have our measurement. For my case, it's going to be 3.25 rows per inch. Just keep that number close. With the cable and cross cardigan, there are 2 neck options. The easiest neckline option to achieve is going to be the square neck, because there is a fixed number of stitches that you skip to create the square neckline. And you simply need to calculate your stitch count by the neck depth. So as you can see on the schematic, you have a 3.5 inch depth, and that remains the same for all sizes. So we're simply going to times the 3.5 inch measurement by the number of rows we have per inch, which for me is 3.25, and that amount is the number of rows that we need to work in the top part of the front panel. So you can opt to do either a 3 inch or a 4 inch opening on the neckline, and for that you'd need to use your stitch count. So I had, let me have a look, I had 4.5 stitches per inch, so I would just calculate 3 by 4.5 to give me the total number of stitches that I would skip before working my neckline. The V-neck, however, is a whole other ballgame, because decreases need to be made evenly across a number of rows that you have to work on. Now, luckily I've chosen the extra large and I've already done this maths, so I know that it works out really easy, but it's not going to be super easy for every single size, especially knowing, understanding how this pattern does decrease. It works out really easily for the extra large size, and that's just coincidence because that's the size that I made. It might take a little bit of fiddling about with those decreases to get them to be evenly spaced. Ideally, when you're decreasing, you never decrease on the last row of the pattern that you're working. So with that in mind, knowing that I have 30 rows to work my V-neck over for the extra large, because that's the top half of shaping the armhole, I need to know how many stitches are being decreased from the start of the armhole shaping for the end of the neckline shaping. So I ended my front panel with 54 single crochets on the extra large, and as I can see on the pattern, the neckline shaping for an extra large ends on 20 stitches. So that means that I need to decrease by 34 stitches over 32 rows. All patterns are different, and it's important to have a look at how often your size would have decreased if you've adjusted the rows, just by looking at how those rows are worked. So over the 32 rows, I need to decrease by 34 stitches. and the pattern is written that I decrease 4 times over those 4 rows just because there's a 4-row repeat. I'm very fortunate that with this size I can simply just follow the pattern, not necessarily how it's written, but the actual decrease rows. By working those rows 8 times, that's going to give me 32 decreases, because 8 times 4 is 32. And you know what? That's close enough for me. I'm not worrying about those extra 2 stitches when it comes to my V-neck. It just means it will be ever so slightly closer towards my neck, really. The V-neck option maths is not as easy, but most designers will help out where they can. I appreciate that all designers have lots of things going on, and you may have to be patient with them if you're messaging them with kind of help me, you know, you're asking them to rewrite their pattern for you. Not everybody's going to be receptive for that, so please be aware of it. It is written for a yarn weight. It is graded based on a yarn weight, and even talking about this maths is like, oh, my brain is pulsing. Maths is not everybody's favourite subject. If you like it, this is going to make so much sense to you, I hope, because it can really open up a world of opportunities of swapping yarns and using different yarn weights. It is important to remember how crochet fabric works. So if you're 1 or 2 stitches out on your finished width of your project, you can probably correct that with blocking as well. You can still stretch it to the finished size and block it to that size. But crochet kind of stretches best vertically. Vertically from top to bottom. So you can get more length out when you're blocking than you would from the width. So if you're a couple of rows out, which I will tell you about in a moment what I did, you can definitely encourage the yarn to stretch depending on which fibre it is. You can definitely encourage it to be a little bit longer than you've made if you need to make that adjustment as well. I of course used acrylic for this cardigan so I could steam block and set that in place, which was very fortunate because when I made the back panel on this cardigan, I completely forgot a repeat and it would have ended up way too short for me. I like certain things covered, so I was able to block my cardigan a lot longer than I would have been able to make it wider. So blocking can correct some errors with tension, but it won't be your answer to everything. I hope this has been informative. You can see the actual written formulas over on the website. I've popped a link in the top right hand corner for you here, so you can remember and work through what you need to do to make your pattern fit based on the yarn weight that you want to use. I hope this information has helped give you confidence not to worry too much if your gauge is off, because there are ways of making it work. If changing your hook size up or down doesn't correct your gauge enough, rest assured, with a little bit of maths, we can get it sorted and get our projects done and finished in the right finished size. Thank you so much for joining me. I will see you in the next video.